Hello, Taylor Elwood here, and welcome to the latest episode of the Men's Mysteries podcast. Every other week, I interview the foremost minds of the men's movement, as well as other people who are supporting men and doing their work to become safer men in the world around them. In today's episode, I'm going to be interviewing Earl Sagewolf, who I had the fortune of meeting at Convergence 9, also known as Remembrance 1 through Sacred Sons. I was able to go through Prime Leadership with him and also go through the LT1, the Leadership Track 1 training through Sacred Sons with him. And from the very beginning, I felt drawn to Earl. He is this compassionate, loving, powerful man. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you today. And what I'd love for you to do is to, in the YouTube, share this episode, comment on it, like on it, and in the Men's Mystery Substack, I'd love if you hearted it, if you shared it, if you restacked it, and if you comment on this episode. Share what's coming up for you. Share what's relevant to you, because that is part of how we get this work out to more men and help share the brilliance and the wisdom of the people that I bring on, as well as, of course, my own work to help you. And I'm also a man who is doing this work. I have my own take on things, which is the Sovereign Code, which is really teaching men how to step fully into their sovereignty. We have lots of warriors out there. We have lots of men who are doing their work to become, to show up in all the right ways. But the sovereignty is where the leadership truly comes into play, and that is what I teach men to do, how to step into their full sovereignty, how to step into full presence so that they can become the leaders of their lives and as a result show up better for all the people around them. All right, without further ado, here is Earl Sagewolf. Welcome to the Men's Mysteries podcast. I am so freaking excited to have you here. Introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Hi, Earl Sagewolf. I'm excited to be on this podcast with you, brother, to just drop in, talk a little bit about what we do, what I do, and maybe, a little bit of play, a little bit of how we met and where we're going. A little bit about me is I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah,
Hmm.
and I'm originally from Temecula, California. Moved here in 2008 and a happy father of five. And I also am married to my beloved, and we are uh, moving and grooving in our divine union and learning ways to support each other in that and create magic within our union, parenting, and leading our community.
Excellent. I did like a couple minutes video before this started, as I always like to do to kind of set things up. And one of the things that I recall is like how I found out about you was I was watching the Sacred Sons podcast, and you had that interview with Adam Jackson, and I thought it was like he seems like a really cool person. I'd love to meet him. And then fast forward to like a couple months later, and I'm at Convergence 9, and I had just gotten there. And who do I see? I'm like, hey, I know you. And of course, you didn't know me. You're kind of like, okay, but I was like, hey, I know you. And then I came up and we started talking about the podcast episode. And what I thought was funny was your beloved's like, I haven't even seen that yet, which just kind of cracked me up. But then like she's like, but I can tell you're one of us. And so that just made me feel really happy. And that was when we first met. And then afterwards, of course, we ended up really connecting at Prime Leadership. And then since then, you've been leading the LT1, which I'm going through right now. And may I add, you've been doing a bang up job. I'm learning a lot and really enjoying it.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, that was a fun opportunity to have our paths cross for the first time. What a container to like be able to do that in that way. Um, I know my wife has still yet to hear that podcast, and I've been on quite a few now that, I mean, it'd be cool for her to listen to it. Also, she knows me. So like most of those stories and some of the things I say either on the regular or she knows about it. So no biggie there. Also, I refer her because I have so many bros in my life and doing this and doing that. I refer you to, you remember that guy we met? at conversions. I mean, not at conversions, but conversions, remembrance. And she's like, oh, yeah. So it's like that moment was the moment from here on into the future that like we met and this is how it all started. Yeah. And then being able to see you step in the Sacred Sons containers and all the other containers that you're doing and learning about you as a writer and, you know, a magician and like, you know, wizard. So it's been pretty cool to like naturally just drop in and get to know you in this way.
Likewise. One of the things that I appreciate about you is that you bring an element of play to men's work. And I've observed that both like in your podcast episodes, but also just connecting with you. So, and that's not something I always see. A lot of times with men's work, it's like, oh, we're going to be super serious. We're going to go and we're going to do the shadow work. We're going to pull all the stuff out. We're going to do this deep dive and get you men to release and all that stuff, which is important. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I also think that element of play is important as well. So can you speak to that and how you integrate that element of play into the work that you do with the brothers that you're working with?
Yeah. That's a good question because sometimes I'm just wondering as well, I'm wondering as you're asking that, like, how do I express? Because it's such a thing that has came through organically through this work for me. Um,
Hmm.
I've been doing this work for quite a while, and I feel what's happening now collectively with this. There's more men that are understanding these templates that were handed to us, different generations of men, and now we're here, and now we're like adulting in this generation, and we're in this generation. I feel like being able to like I mean our brains and our thoughts and our minds are expanding to a space where we could like, oh, I don't want to act like that. I don't want to show up that way. I don't want to. So I guess what I'm saying, the play came as in layers when I first started doing the work. I like part of my um and still part of my work is, you know, the organization piece of the masculine, the like get it done masculine, because like you said, it's kind of organically like I play. So you know, the shadow work that needed to happen in my journey, and the realness and the crying and the vulnerability and all the things that still are very valuable in this space and in this work, was very much the main thing for me. And until I tapped into my play and learning how to mix it in to this work has been, you know, different, it's spread out into different ways throughout my journey. I think for me, it's that like learning to bring it into this work and in an authentic way. And I'm still finding ways, you know, even just with my wife, my goal this year is to laugh more. It's not like we don't, but like I used to make her laugh and like rustle and do all the things, you know, it's so serious. And so now I'm bringing it into my life as I've learned in this work. And so for me, it's more, I show up more authentically. And I think what you're feeling and what I've gotten feedback is I do have this essence of permission to just do whatever the fuck you want and like be who you want to be. Um, I try my best to come into these spaces or walk into in my life non-judgmental. And to be honest, we have this kind of judgment of like protection or who's this person or that person reminds me of when I was a kid, like that kind of judgment, you know. And for me, I try to keep it concise and like pure. So when it does come up, thank you, don't need you, let's play. Let me get to know this person. Let me just like not judge as whoa, and I learn amazing wizard tricks from you know, like just being open to that, you know. And so like I feel like there's so many different types of play. And even when I first started, or some men and women that are listening to this podcast hearing play, it's like get down and play with your kids, or go throw a football, or go, you know, play tetherball or foursquare when you were a kid, or rollerblade. Yes, that's definitely a piece. But I think for me, it's the essence of play. Like I come in, and the essence of play is like that kid, my 5 year old, when he's on the playground, he just goes up to a random kid and they both look at each other like, you want to play? Cool. Chase, tag, you're it. Like that essence. And I feel like when I walk into a container, a bunch of bros that like, you know, especially participants at this point where they're like, what did I sign up for? Fuck, my wife made me come here, or whatever the thing is. Their eyes are big and like, what the hell? This guy has a cape and this guy has a staff, like, and we're singing. And when they're feeling in that way, in some cases, the essence of play is inviting them to just like have the courage and feel safe to like, oh, just be open, like be you, like all of you is welcome. And so I think that's what you could be speaking to, because I'm not always at the in these when I'm with you in these containers or other bros where I'm like rustling and high-fiving and throwing things around. I don't like, for me it's not that kind of play. It's an invitation to be curious, not judgmental, and play in the realms of who you authentically are.
Yeah, I want to speak to that actually because you're exactly right. It's not necessarily that. I mean, we do have like sacred combat in Sacred Sun, so there is that element of play,
Mhm.
and and like doing some of the somatic exercises and things. And I love that about Sacred Sons. That's not something I really see in other men's work containers that I've been in.
Mhm.
But what I'm really speaking to is that sense of imagination and wonder. See, like for myself, speaking for myself, I had to grow up very quickly, very early. Like I feel like I didn't really get to have a childhood. I kind of
Mhm.
had to be an adult early on. And then later on, like in my 20s and 30s, that came out sideways in some ways, like not in a way that where it felt like really responsible. Like one example would be that I used to play video games a lot. I still do occasionally, and I don't have anything against someone playing video games, but I think that like a lot of times people play video games to numb themselves. Certainly that's what I did. And now when I play a game, it's like, well, I want to play it for the story. I want to play it to enjoy it, but I also don't want to spend all my time playing. Like I have so many other things I want to do. I want to create. I want to do things. So it's coming from a place of creation and wonderment and imagination. And I'm kind of curious, did you have that experience yourself where like maybe you had to grow up earlier than you wanted to in your life?
Yeah, I feel like given going way back, given my situation of if that I feel like that's a whole nother episode, another conversation. To touch bases on it though, is there is a space of during like before I got into this work where alcohol was like, I was like an alcoholic, I like needed it, or I didn't need it, but when I started drinking, I couldn't like put it down. I just need, yeah, I'm down for a shot. Let's just keep going. And so I feel like that was my numbing, and my numbing was pretending that I was the cool guy and like I was the nice guy, because I was that was the feedback I was getting outside of my home and my loved ones, and then I would just leave all of that at the door and then be an asshole or be this person that is hurt, vulnerable, and not being able to share or be seen, or all those things were just mustered inside. So I was numbing outside of my house and then just bulldozing like this curated person and version of myself based on numbing myself and like pretending that I'm playing and pretending that I'm this nice guy. And so, yeah, there was a part of that whole situation and persona of who I showed up in that time as, based on my childhood. And,
Hmm.
we weren't, we lived in poverty. My dad, left. Uh, I mean, the most I known of my dad was leaving at least once to three times a month, supporting his habit and taking money from the family, and my mom throwing us in the car to go to Riverside County to look for him and like find him. And then there's other things. Again, like I said, there's another time and place for that story in detail. But there's other things that we saw my dad in, like, and then he would go and we'd go to church and he would try his best to like step into this leadership role or this spiritual role, and my mom and dad would take on being youth pastors at this new church we were at, and then another church, and we were and just it was just kind of weird to watch the dynamic between my mom and dad, the dynamic how my dad was showing up and raising us, and um the times he left and was in prison and left us to Florida, all the see the little there's so much behind what I'm saying right now, but all those little moments I had to step up, and me and my brother had to step up and, try to help my mom. And bless my mom, she would, work two jobs. You know that story, just
Oh
two
yeah.
jobs to keep us going. And so I feel like there's a lot of the unpacking of this work that we're in, has been throughout these years to like realize, oh, that's where that came from. That's where that anger, or the simplicity of worthiness, which is I feel in my experience and experiencing other men now, plagues men in masculinity is the worthiness. And it stems from all of our stories of like holding it in, boys don't cry, and how our parents, always was, at least in the stories, always was fixing us or like, hey, you don't do this, tighten it up. And as a parent now, I notice that applauding the things that they do versus always saying the things they're not doing or they're doing wrong or they're spilling milk, crying over spilled, all those things really curate your worthiness. And I'm saying you as in us collectively, because that's, the wound. One of the main wounds is the worthiness. So it's as simple as all these little stories that I've learned through these containers and doing the work, or just being courageous to jump in and be vulnerable with other bros. That it was the simplicity of even my wife saying, "Hey, you didn't do this," and I was taking that personal, offensive, and then go deeper. It's my worthiness, and like, why am I treating her and it's a curious, valid concern that I took personal. And if anything, now that I'm, working on that and I've gotten better, not taking it personal, I could see the growth in our family and like goals and like moving towards things. So yeah, that's a big part of my childhood and what kept me like stuck. My numbing, like you were saying, your video games. Mine was pretending I was that guy, like I knew already, like I was being nice and I wasn't taking it personal. So being radically honest with myself. So the opposite of that was my numbing. So it was alcohol and that versus the video games.
Well, and I had some other forms of numbing as well. But that was just the example when it comes to play.
Sure.
But I find, like with this kind of stuff, it's kind of interesting to see that. And of course, at a certain point, we get the opportunity to step into our sovereignty, into our power, and to claim our lives on our terms, to step out of the shadows of our ancestors. And I think that one of the ways that happens is through that sense of play. So for me, like what I found is that as I got into men's work and started to really discover some of the different flavors, it was like, for example, going into sacred combat and knowing that, like, here I am, I'm across the ring from this other person, and I'm going to box this person. But who am I really boxing? I'm boxing myself. And oh, here's an invitation to play. Yes, there's going to be some work, but there's also an invitation to play and have some fun and bring some laughter and joy into it. So you're a parent and you've got kids and so how does that play show up as a result of being in those kids' lives? Like you kind of hinted at that, like where you said, like recognizing their achievements, not just focusing on like, oh, hey, you spilt the milk.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like play, again, going back to the essence of just being authentically yourself. For me, what's coming online is, like there's an opportunity to really teach them and guide them in a way that, like, oh, that, see how that didn't pan out the way you thought, and go into it with the essence of play, which is like curiosity and openness and non-judgmental and smiles accordingly, and so instead of, hey, don't do that next time, oh, I told you, or like, what, all the things I received as a kid. um I like to, and I've learned a lot through the compassion of my wife. She's taught me a lot of this compassion piece in parenting and still does. And sometimes to me, I'm like, she's so compassionate. Like, let's meet in the middle. But she has taught me so many things in these spaces of being able to be patient and with the kids. So for instance, if they were to break something that we paid for in a toy aspect because they just threw it, um ugh, that comes up, my nervous system gets shook and all the things. And instead of feeding into what I got dished out, I get to pause and be curious. So an aspect of play, so I'm curious why you threw that. I could see and I could assume you're upset, something happened, you know what I mean? And just like in that level, also being really short with conversation, depending on their age, because their attention span is
Right.
not there. So I'm not going to give them a life lesson because they do some and I see all the things. It's just reading the moment and being with the moment, being present and authentic and curious with it. So that's something I that came up for me that I do on the essence of play with my kids is have more of an open understanding of and compassion where they're at and meeting them there and um, being curious and asking questions, why, what, and what happened, or what's coming up. And then there's not always um, an answer as a parent that I'm finding out in those situations. And my parents, their answer was a quick, default to grounding me or taking something away or, you know, yelling or saying certain things, so another thing that I find in this slowing down curiosity of play is that yeah, I don't have an answer and I don't need an answer to support what's happening with my child. And most cases it's running its course and letting the scream come out, letting the shake come out, letting the I hate you come out. And that's a word my 3 year old, almost 4 year old has been using. And since she's been using it, and I've been in this realm now after, four other kids with her, I'm like, oh, you do, huh? Okay. And I don't let it like show that it affects me. And I don't show that it's a thing, kind of like us walking around nude. It's just human, like there's nothing, different. So as I've been doing that, she's actually really learned by herself what love and hate means because she'll come around the same way saying, I love you, mom. I love you, dad. And then she'll come around, I hate you. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like, I don't. So the curiosity and the openness and like not um, having a solution or an answer because why are you saying hate? Do you know what that means? Blah, blah, blah. So I get the opportunity to slow down. And then eventually I have had that conversation with her. You know what hate means? On a like where her nervous system's in a different state, where her receiving aspect is in a different state. And so yeah, that's a big opportunity I noticed as a parent, for parents and for myself, to enter um, parenting into this essence of play. Because for dads, get on the floor, play with your kids. That's like out there right now. Just play with your kids. And yeah, this is a good topic, and a big topic is like the essence of play, not just physically. There's so many aspects to this.
Yeah, I think that something that really kind of strikes me about it is, and this is something that I've kind of come up with other, with other people I've talked with, is kind of the sensitive hearts of men. Men, we have very sensitive hearts. We are very aware of the environment around us, and part of that is learning how to receive all that information in, being curious, asking questions. I love that, because it's not something I see often enough. Like, let's step away from the place of having to know and actually invite in that curiosity and that wonder. How does that translate over into your work with men? Whether you're at Sacred Sons or you're doing, one-on-one work or other containers, how does that end up translating over when you're working with men?
That's a good question. It's pretty much matched the same. As I'm working on myself and like developing and understanding and knowing who I am in little detailed situations or big situations or solving problems or, making things happen. Um, and solving problems meaning like one-on-one with a man, this is how XYZ is happening. Where am I getting the message from? What experience am I pulling from or training to give and offer this man? I do the same with my kids. It's the curiosity, the willingness to be open, the willingness to learn and not always be right wherever I'm at. Um, so for me, it's the tagline for myself is how I show up in one thing is typically how I show up in everything, and I want to be authentically the same person everywhere I go in
Hmm.
every situation. So that's like my whole uh, movement. And that's the creed for me is to like, hey, if I'm going to be this person here, I'm going to definitely be this person here. Obviously it varies. I'm making love with my wife and we're making magic and stuff. That's a different love than I have obviously a love for you, right? And
Right.
love, yeah, and that love statures into the same kind of energetics. It's felt and seen differently, right? So I still show up in that way, and the same as the ways with my family, my kids, my wife, my brothers, my extended family. And so that's how it works for me. I take on each situation. The key component for me is first be present and breathe, so I could not be overwhelmed. My nervous system get, oh, they just said this. And especially like you've been to a Sacred Sons event, as I've worked my way up in training and getting reps and stuff. And as you're doing this, you'll possibly be in this field too, if you haven't already or more. There's an opportunity where you get to step in the middle and guide a brother into remembering who the fuck they are by asking the right question, possibly, or doing the right, exercise or somatic work or whatever, right? And so if I don't come in fully like aligned, grounded, breath and slow and curious and open, and ready to receive as much as I'm ready to give, and have all of that, and 20 to 30 to 60 men are watching too, the nerves and all that stuff. And then the leaders that lead are watching as well. If I don't have this space that I can do when my son throws his toy or my wife is having a hard conversation with me and she's throwing a lot at me and she's just concerned and she has fears, and if I can't hold that or hold over here where my son, or my daughter's doing this or throwing the hate word, how can I show up and hold the container and lead in the way I do, um, in the Sacred Sons moment in a container or anywhere else, or a one-on-one container. So a key component for me, like I said, is to be present, to breathe, and to be open to receive and open to give. That's just the main, and showing up how I show up in everything.
Yeah, a saying that I like to throw out there that kind of relates to that is I can only show up for others as much as I'm showing up for myself.
Hmm.
So, I have to show up for myself first. Say yes to myself is how I like to put it, my honor my sacred yes in order to say yes to other people or in order to show up for them. And
Hmm.
I have facilitated in like in other containers like mankind projects. So I've definitely done that work and had that experience. And a huge part of it has been, how do I hold space with myself and honor that part of me and at the same time be able to set that aside and be fully focused on that man.
Yeah.
And so I think about that. And so this kind of leads me to my next question, which is, how do you father yourself? Because I think that's an important element of this. Like we have that wounded child, we have that wounded young man, we maybe have that wounded adult, and that comes out like we're facilitating, right? And we see this other man across from us, and we're getting ready to work on that man. And then there's something in that man that just hits that button, and it's like, oh, I've got to step up and father myself really quickly before I go and help this person, before I'm uncle to this person and help him out or whatever it is. So, like, what is it that you do to honor your sacred yes and father yourself in those moments where things come up and you've got to show up in the way that you're seeking to show up?
Well, just what comes online right now is the honor my sacred no as well.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, if I can't find the answer from source, spirit, God, or experience, or I'm pulling from training, if it's not there, I literally get to say no and pass the ball. That's first and foremost. If I'm in leadership in that way, um, again, it's like how I show up, like in everything. Like with the kids, I'm like, oh, I can't. My nervous system's high. Tag, you're it. I pass the ball to my wife. Like that's very vital. Before anything, my ego gets to step out of the way,
Mhm.
especially in those containers where we're naturally competitive and we're thriving and we're these men that like want to show like we got this and we want to serve and we want to step in those kind of spaces. For myself, my ego, I get to check my ego first to see where how I could provide, and if it's me that provides this piece as an uncle, or like my experience as a father for this man. Because typically when we're going into these spaces and this container is set with sacred sons, we are going to their 12-year-old, we are going to their 8-year-old. So it is fathering, right? And so if I don't check myself pretty quickly and promptly in that moment with that, and then pass it over to uncle or Adam or whoever's leading or co-leading with me, that you know i I get to do that. That's the first, is my honoring with my sacred yes, my sacred no. And how do I father myself? A big piece of my sacred no is if I haven't went through that and I can't find the empathy or the understanding in that piece, that's when I pass it, right? I've been through a lot too, and I could say this for my bros that are leading right now. They've been through a lot too, and I feel like no, I don't feel like it. Well, I do feel it, but I know the gift that we have as leaders to lead and to go to the depths that we do is because we've been there and we've experienced it and we've been on the polarity of that. So like the addictions, the pornography, the whatever comes up that a man is giving us at this point, we've either been there or been around it or able to come out on top to offer these tools and this reference, or these ways of moving through this somatically with these men. And so to answer your question, as a father, that's how been able to refather myself. It's not necessarily I put it in the compartment of like, okay, this weekend I'm refathering myself. I just know it's as a father, and how I treat my and how I move and show up for my kids and my wife is genuinely how I am going to father myself. And to get there is being able to be compassionate to myself, be loving to myself, be open and vulnerable for myself. And the main juice of it all is to start it is to be radically honest with myself. Like in these vulnerable states of, and I put quote unquote, because there's men that do step in, I've noticed, and even me in the beginning, saying like the right words, the holistic words, the big things, the like, I'm I'm moving through so much right now, or whatever, which again is real because I do
Right.
do a lot of shit. At the time, though, how radically honest in myself am I to myself? Am I really fathering myself like my dad fathered me? Or am I fathering myself authentically and radically honest with myself? And I am actually embodying and cognitively moving through this shit, moving through this story to replace, to find, have new places to replace new stories and stuff like that. So yeah, again, it's not compartmentalized to me. It's like, oh, this is how I'm showing up. And the other part of it is I'm still refathering myself. There's layers, to it. And I have a 19 and an 18-year-old, and then I have all the way down to almost 4-year-old. And so there's so many pockets of how when I was 18 and 19, that come up today. Like, oh, I thought I fathered myself in that. And then it comes up, and I get to have the compassion and space to, like, when that comes up for my teenage boys or my 3-year-old daughter, to like if I don't address it the right, the right way, quote unquote, or if I'm being an asshole for that moment and it's because it's so raw, then I have compassion and I'm like, oh shit, I'm being an asshole, or this is coming up and I feel edgy. And so the difference of that now than it was back then, I was on autopilot. So when it came up and I was edgy, I was just edgy for a week or 2 days, or, you know, because I didn't have the tools or the training or what I have now to lead other men and father myself to like, oh, it's coming up. I'm being an asshole. Oh, I come back. Sorry, whatever. My recovery game is strong. And I know what tool to get out of it, to move forward. And so, yes, again, the refathering piece for me is a continuous, and I call it like a reparenting, but father being that we're dealing with men, but reparenting myself is a continuous motion. And at this point, those are the steps how I got to this point in fathering myself.
I like that you said sacred no, because that's true. Yes, there's the sacred yes, and then there's the sacred no. And I
Mhm.
think the way that I like to put it is, well, I'm saying yes to myself first before I say yes to somebody else. But there's also being able to say no to myself. And I think that comes into an element of play that it may not seem like it would be an element of play, but I think it is. It's integrity. How do I stay in integrity with myself and then show up for other people? This goes back to that concept of showing up. So, what role does integrity play in your work? Because I would observe about you that you seem to be a man of integrity. It's one of the things that I really respect about you, just on the basis of having met you and connecting with you. And I will say that one of the things I respect about you is that you are really honest and open about your challenges. Without going into anything that you've shared in a different container, you shared a challenge recently, and I loved how you showed up for it, and like I just fell in love with you even more in that moment. I was like, this is a brother I can rely upon because he's honest and integrity, and I
Mm,
respect that.
mm. Yeah. So, again, integrity was an edgy word for me. And I believe it's kind of edgy for, a lot of men. Um, just because it goes back to this radically honest with myself type piece. Like the integrity piece is like, oh, I could just kind of get away with it. Like nobody knows. And then I'm like, oh, am I being radically honest with myself? So for me, the integrity piece is what you're feeling and how I show up for everyone and myself. And the inside, the my heart knows my radically honest piece. And then the whole puzzle that puts it together for me is devotion, period. That's like my non-negotiable. I'm devoted. This is my devotion. So like just breaking it down in different pieces, it comes from like the core essence of my devotion to my new life, who I am, all the things that I work through, and all the things that I want, that I see coming, that are showing up, and and leaving my legacy and all those things. So this devotion turns into, like, my devotion is my life, what I'm doing, and then the integrity are the little moments in between that, in that whole life span, right? It's my, and that's what you feel, and that's what my wife feels, and then if she doesn't feel it, she calls me in and all that stuff, right? And then the biggest piece is me in my integrity in myself, which is, my, again, the devotion and all that stuff. And so, for me, my radically honest self is, it pours out a little bit, like you said, in these containers. I've been able to do that. One thing that struck me on this road, this red road that I've been able to travel with many bros and myself and other women, is that there's a certain leader, like it's changing, but because I've been doing this 17 years, and so it's like been like a, there's certain leaders, like my first set with Plant Allies and then Sweat Lodge and stuff, they just had this like I'm a leader role, and like this feel of like untouchable, like almost they put themselves on a pedestal type, and it's still around.
Hmm.
It's still around. um I've always told myself, and it's not even, let me rephrase that. I never told myself that. I just knew this about myself. As I'm getting into like more authentic places in myself, this is arising more to where, okay, now I'm in this type of leadership. I'm not changed again. I'm showing up the same way. So the thing that you were talking about, if I remember, was like somehow tobacco came back into my life out of stress and all the things very recently, and it put a hold on me and my wife's relationship because it was a non-negotiable. We've already so there was this whole story around it and this really harsh wall that was put up between my union, between me and my wife, and myself. And so I was able to share that with you guys in the container. And that's the one thing that I miss in leadership, people that have been doing it above, like my mentors and stuff, is like, bro, you act like you didn't, are you really, did you, oh man, you're just that person. Your life's easy, you know? And so the thing that I always bring up and that just keeps reminding myself is I'm always, there's always going to be something, right? There's different layers to it. You know, like the way I handled this tobacco now than I did back then, it's so different. So it's okay. I feel like it's more personable, and that's what I'm doing this for, is like we're humans. You guys are my bros. And then there's Sacred Sons, and then there's leadership, and then there's all this stuff, right? So with that, I'm able to like show up the same and tell you guys that story. So I have the capability, the reps, and the courage to tell my wife the real story and to really be radically honest with myself and tell me this story. Other than that, I don't think, I don't know how it is for other men, but for me, I don't think I'd be radically honest with myself if I couldn't be radically honest with you guys, even if I'm ahead of something. You know, like as a boss, I've led teams in hair, I've traveled, I've led salons, and all the things. Like I've always been this like, oh yeah, I'm fucking up. Like, sorry, let me see how I could get back on the horse. So yeah, thanks for noticing that. And that's something I'm always going to take with me as I continue this role of leadership. And I don't like saying levels and all that stuff. And yes, and there is levels and like how high you go. And me up here speaking, I have the heart and the capability and the courage to say, oh, I slipped. I need help. And because I did that, there's a brother on the call that put his down, and I haven't been smoking since that call. So,
Well, one, I celebrate you. Like that is freaking awesome, brother. I'm proud of you. And this really kind of this leadership is the theme for my year 2025. This is about me leading myself in my life. Now I've been a leader in other communities. Like I've been in the magical community for over 20 years writing books, so I know all about people being put on pedestals. I've been put on pedestals sometimes, and what I've always said to people is like, look, I'm a fallible person. I make mistakes. Like don't take everything I share with a grain of salt. Find out for yourself is what I've always said in those contexts. And it's the same thing that I'm bringing into the men's work that I do here because I feel like someone who's a leader, if they're getting too full of themselves, they're actually not leading. They're not leading themselves, certainly. So how the hell could they possibly lead anybody else? I
mhm,
respect a man who leads himself by example and leads in part because he's able to openly admit his mistakes. A man who acts like he's perfect, I'm not going to trust that man because that man definitely has shadows, and his light is actually casting those shadows out, and at some point we're going to spot it anyway.
right, right. And then in these containers, the way they're being set, and the way the expansion of like humanity is happening, and even just this conversation wasn't really happening even 7 years ago, as abundant as it is. And I just think you can't slip like it's just like something you can't really um, slip by. Like even my whole smoking thing, I told you guys, my wife knew the 5 months I was smoking. She finally had enough and told me. Like I can't sneak, like you can't sneak this stuff around when you're dealing with men that are empowered, or women or humans that are empowered, know who they are and know what their gifts are, and they're moving forward and serving, and you just can't. And
No,
then
they're going to figure it out. They're going to
yeah,
sniff it
right.
out.
Eventually, right? And it's happening, and the figuring out is happening quicker because we're tapped in. And I've been in spaces like festival spaces where they're all wearing the crystals and doing the work, quote unquote and stuff. And it's just like very surface spiritual. It's not, there's lack of depth to where like what you were seeing is like, oh, there's the pedestal. There's the guy that and the girl that's on the pedestal and they're serving cacao or they're doing the yoga, but you can't really drop in with it as a human. So it's still out there. And that's just how I'm choosing to show up in my leadership. And not even just in my leadership as Earl Sagewolf. Like that's just who I am.
Well, that's just it. Like, I can relate to you as a person, and that's what I want. Like, at the end of the day, when I look at the relationships and like why I got into this work, I want to connect with other men. One of the most, one of the men that I know through Mankind Project, he is one of the humblest men you would know. Like, the work that he does and everything else, you wouldn't know that he was a full leader, that leads full weekends and stuff like that. You'd have no idea. And even on the weekend, the way that he shows up, he's in the background. Like a lot of the time, you don't even know he's there. Why? Because he's taking care of the entire container. That's what he's there to do. That to me is what leadership is. Like it's easy to step out into the spotlight and be like, "Here I am," and that leadership is needed. Don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, I want to know the person. I want to feel like I can sit across the table from that person or across the camera here, like we're doing right now, and have a real authentic conversation and be like, I know this person. I know that if I came to you, for example, and said, hey, here's some stuff going on, here's where I'm struggling right now, that you would lovingly hold me to account, call me out on my shit, and at the same time be there, be like, I got you, brother. You're going to get through this. That's what I want. That's what leadership is, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's the medicine too. And that's the other thing too, stepping into leaderships in different containers I have been in, outside of Sacred Sons and inside of Sacred Sons. To be honest, like um stepping into leadership, what is your relationship with leadership within yourself, and what does it look like? What are you inspiring to do and be in whatever organization you are in or in your life? Because at the end, like soon enough, you'll see through the leadership and through an organization if something doesn't go the way you think so, or like this person's showing up that way, and it's like none of that is in our control. What is your primary understanding and um, attention to detail and what you want in leadership? Because that's going to deter like your next couple years of like how you're going to show up and how you're going to speak to things, and how you may make a decision to leave the organization or come back. Because it's at the end for me what you just said, it's not like the paying part of it for your time, the exchange, the the manuals, the processing, all the things I hold high, and they're like, that's what we're doing. But what I hold higher is my relationships and my brothership. Like I have all my bros, and I get on a phone call at least once a day with a different bro at this point, almost, from Sacred Sons or my local community. And that's why it's not Sacred Sons comes like second or third on my list. It's like the individual, it's the person, it's me and our relationship. And so that's how I've been able to dive into this leadership. And there's been some things because it's an organization and it's not mine that I was like, what? But what kept me going is my relationships with these bros that I kept, you know, to see and hear their side of it and being open to it. It wasn't because, oh, I'm going to go do this EMX, I'm going to go do this, event and get paid. I'm going to go do this and get acknowledgement and get seen and heard for my magic and how I lead. That's not what I'm here for.
Hmm.
And I'm still, now that I am, leading teams and doing all this stuff, I'm still not here for that. I'm here to like enrich in my old relationships and grow new ones. And that's with you guys and in myself as a leader. So I want to enrich in my leadership and my relationship to that and grow new like aspects and concepts of that for myself to give. So yeah, that's a big point, man. Is it's the intention of why we're doing this, not to show up on the pedestal or for money or for, hey, that bro said this and it hurt my feelings. versus like, oh, is this in alignment or out of alignment? You know? So yeah, there's those things that are big for me, and that's why I'm still here and I'm still rocking with the Suns and I'm still rocking this work. Also, the main reason why is it's changed my life, you know? So
Here, here. I'm fully here for that, brother. So I have two last questions for you. The first question is, where can we find you on the web?
yes, that's a good one because right now, literally after this call, I am on a call with my coach, getting my website, my funnels, all the things put together. So, here in a little bit, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, I do have www.earlsagewolf.com, and that will have all my information. It's just, getting built right now. But if it's not there, it's Instagram. Earl Sagewolf, make it simple. And then all my other things are on there, like my my local men's group, all the way to my crowns that I make. I make these hats, I personalize those, to like just DMing me, saying what up, liked what you said on the podcast, whatever. So it's mostly just those right now. Facebook a little bit, it's Earl Sagewolf. But yeah, that's it.
Okay, excellent. And finally, what I always like to ask each of my guests is to leave a final word of wisdom that all of us can take with us into the day moving forward. So, what is your final word of wisdom that we can take with us?
Oh man, that's kind of just be curious in the essence of play, and then the more you do that, the more I was able to do that, the more I was able to show up authentic, and the more things in my life just become more and more aligned, is because I'm on the path of what I'm here to do and how I'm here to show up, and day by day, minute by minute, and being present. So my whole thing is just play and be curious with the essence of play.
Perfect. I love it. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Just getting a chance to know you even further. The more I get to know you, the more I'm like, this is a solid bro. And I'm glad I have him in my life, and I really am. So, and I get to see you later today too.
Yeah, make a call in like a couple hours. Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
for having me on here. It's awesome to see what you're doing and how you're creating this space for men to speak into these subjects. And at the same time, you get to learn so much from other men and build community and relationships. So that's cool. Thank you for having me.
All right. So that was Earl Sagewolf. If you get a chance, click below on the show notes there. You'll see his website. Go check him out. He's an amazing brother. And again, if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe, please comment, please like, please share. If you're on Substack, please heart this, restack it, comment on it. This is how we get this work out there and help more men transform their lives. Like whether whether those men are working with Earl, with me, or with someone else, like the point of this work is that we are creating a better and safer world for everyone by doing this work. I fervently believe that. And if you're just fine, connecting with me for the first time and you're curious about my work, go visit inneralchemycoach.com. Check out my book, The Quest for the Mature Masculinity, which is available on that site, and get reading. All right. Have a great day, and thank you all for watching this episode.